Hello, I'm Maciej Mikos, and you're watching World Talks. Emotions in Prague are flying high after the Czech president accused the country's foreign minister of a blackmail and is now considering filing a criminal charge against him. Now, this all comes as the Czechia's new budget significantly slashes defense spending. And to talk about the latest from the Czech Republic, we're joined by Wojciech Przybylski, editor-in-chief of the Visegrad Insight. Good afternoon.
Hello.
So could you explain what's this latest political crisis in Czechia about?
In short, it is on one side a power play between the cabinet of Andrej Babiš and specifically parts of the cabinet that belong to the quite a radical wing of motorist party, represented in the cabinet by Petr Machinka, foreign minister, coming from this party, in the standoff with President Pavel over the decisions how the cabinet should look like. Mr. Pavel has blocked the appointment of another member from the radical party, Mr. Turek, because of numerous scandalous public statements this individual has had in the past, basically dividing the Czech society and basically not falling in the scope of civilized speech. And he has been blocked. Mr. Babiš, the prime minister, agreed to form the cabinet without Mr. Turek. But what has been just revealed is that Mr. Maciej, the foreign minister, has been trying to put unprecedentedly non-parliamentary pressure in terms of communication of the text messages.
Oh, let me quote it.
Of Mr. Pavel.
Let me quote it. I have it here.
Go ahead.
He, the president, can have peace if I get Turek at the Ministry of the Environment. If not, I will burn bridges in a way that will go down in political science textbooks. Now, this indeed sounds like a blackmail, but what is Petr Machinka really talking about when he says that he will burn down bridges?
So it sounds very potent, very powerful in terms of a text message as a big power player like Kissinger, but in fact it's rather provincial. It's a squabble. Mr. Machinka wants to do harm to the diplomacy of Petr Pavel and thus damage Czech reputation in front of NATO allies. He was essentially considering scaling down Czech presence at the NATO meeting by not allowing Petr Pavel to represent Czech Republic. Petr Pavel, who is the strongest card among NATO allies, being very credible and respected former NATO general. So Mr. Machinka is burning bridges on his side of the river, apparently equally, at least in the threats that we have seen. But the tone and the unprecedented pressure of that sort, when it was leaked, demanded the response of the presidential palace. So the president announced criminal complaints or the letter to investigate potential unlawful behavior of that sort behind closed doors, and hence the drama continues. And that's one element, as I said, of the power play tension between the two cabinets. The other one that you already alluded in the introduction is a more of a financial nature. So apparently the government wants to have also different excuses of why not to honor the Czech commitment to increase the NATO 3.5% spending on defense, plus additional 1.5% on supporting infrastructure and the general resilience of the country, which has been a common NATO country's pledge. Now, part of the disagreement is that Petr Pavel stands on the side of honoring the agreement, and the government wants to slash the commitments to the currently or the previously held 2% point contribution.
Right. Now, how do you think it will affect Czechia's transatlantic relations with the US?
Well, that is really interesting because on one side, as I said, the politicians close to Mr. Babiš try to imitate a hardliner approach that is clearly visible also in the style of the political culture of Donald Trump, making demands, threats, demonstrating by strong language a lot of this kind of power politics attitude. But in the end, also this is contradictory in the substance to what Mr. Trump asked and demanded from NATO allies in Czechia as well, namely to increase the budgets much beyond this 3.5%. When Czechia scales down the contribution, it definitely falls on the deaf ear in Washington, despite Czech verbal and symbolic support for Donald Trump. So that is contradictory and potentially self-damaging, again, for the Czech foreign security policy.
Right. Now, what's the public support for these motorists?
Well, they made it to the government with above the threshold, but not with significant support. And they are unlikely to rise to prominence in the opinion polls. Many consider the party not to be a stable formation, but rather a leftover of those who once supported former President Václav Klaus and former Prime Minister in a given time. These were his aides. We've seen they struggled on a number of different initiatives. So clearly, they also want to make the fuzz in the public opinion. They want to attract attention and have these fierce comments in order to build up emotional base for their support in the Czech Republic. It's too early to say, what will be the electoral result. The elections have just taken place in Czech Republic, but clearly, I say it as an element of their political marketing strategy, also to be visible as a part of the coalition, rather to be dissolved in the overall course of how smaller parties are victims and they're eaten up by the coalition majors, which is ANO, run by Andrej Babiš.
So these tensions, this political scandal, shall we call it, is serving clearly the motorists' interests, but is it also helping Prime Minister Babish's agenda?
Well, that is hard to say because Mr. Babiš navigates the government in a very specific way. There is not a very strong policy agenda. It doesn't include ideological front, although he belongs to the European grouping of Viktor Orban. He rather aligns his policies closely to more, domestic sentiments of those who simply do not want to contribute to any international projects. They want to withdraw from their commitments and save money. And in that spirit, he is not that different from the cabinet of Petr Fiala from the previous term, the cabinet that was famous to be one of the hardest in terms of austerity measures, cutting spending and keeping the budget numbers looking good for the accounting performance, but then losing elections. And Andrej Babiš is apparently in no rush to also be regarded as someone who overspends and uses the state's budget money on things that the public in Czech Republic, especially his electorate, would not necessarily benefit from directly in form of either subsidies or any other payments that the Czech public would recognize as immediate benefits in front of their door. So defense spending seems to be one of the victims. Also, the support for Ukraine, which, in all honesty, we have to say that Mr. Babiš has declared to stop it, but he didn't eventually stop the flow of the military supplies to Ukraine. He stopped, or he continued to not provide funding. Stop or limitation of that funding has been already visible in the previous cabinet. So there is a certain continuation of the policy. Mr. Babiš stays away from this discourse. He tried to mediate. He's not directly involved in the conflict. And of course, he holds ground on the side of the coalition, trying to maintain the cabinet together.
Well, Petr Marcinka is his foreign minister, and I'm wondering, the defense spending is at the 2% of GDP level. There will be no training planes for Ukrainians. Well, Ukrainians wanted to use it in a different manner, but it doesn't matter. Do the Czechs feel that safe? Do they feel like there's no threat from Russia at all?
Well, in the electorate of Andrej Babiš, apparently so, and he relates to the sentiments and the feelings of those who feel detached from the worldly or global obligations that Czechia has been committed to. This is the line that Petr Marcinka also represented. He declared only last week that he's scaling down from the legacy of Václav Havel, the connection of security interests and the moral cause, the axiology that elevates human rights and values, democratic values, as one of the primary objectives of Czech foreign policy. So in that sense, this definitely speaks to the part of the population in Czechia that oftentimes is considered the population from smaller villages and towns, people who prefer karczmas, so the places of the canteens where they also share beer and talk, ordinary bars, over the much cultured and elevated discussions attributed to the so-called Prague Café. But those who support and they also long for value-driven foreign policy of Czech Republic are equally strong. So it just, the government and the cabinet plays on certain sentiments, on certain also interest groups that are visible in Czech Republic, but they don't speak to the majority of the population. Last point I wanted to make is that there is also a very strong defense industry lobby in Czech Republic that also prevents or anchors elements of the foreign and security policy of Czechia towards Ukraine in general within NATO, and will likely moderate the sentiments or the policies of the government so that Czechia is not sidelined in what is becoming one of the biggest, also in terms of business projects of defense of the European Union, like cooperation on defense industry.
Wojciech Przybylski, editor-in-chief of the Visegrad Insight, was our guest this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching, and stay with us for more interviews here on TVP World.